2.3 million blocks of stone, each one 2.5 tons on average, some 80, placed one on top of the other every 5 minutes around the clock for 20 years. No stops, no delays, no weekends. That's not a legend. That's the arithmetic of the Great Pyramid. And right now, we're going to do something that the comfortable explanation really doesn't want you to do. We're going to check it. The Egyptians were obsessive record keepers. Not casual, not approximate, obsessive. Thousands of papyri survive. Inventories of grain shipments, rosters of workers, complaints from foremen about beer rations. They documented the barley in the granaries. They documented every strike, every priest's quarterly report, every sack of linen delivered to a temple 2,000 miles up the Nile. We know the daily bread allowance per laborer at Deir el-Medina. We know the copper weight issued to a single chisel maker in the 12th dynasty. 3 millennia of continuous bureaucratic obsession, and the papyri prove it. And yet, about the greatest construction project in the history of the human species, not one operational document, not a blueprint, not a foreman's log, not a supply chain manifest, not a measurement standard, not a single line about how to move, cut, lift, or place a block that weighs more than a loaded truck. 0. That's the number. Hold it, because what comes next will make you question every documentary you've ever watched about this structure. We're told the answer is simple. The accepted answer sounds clean. 20,000 workers, copper tools, hemp ropes, wooden sledges, limestone ramps. 20 years of organized labor under Pharaoh Khufu, around 2560 BC. It's a neat, tidy package. Every documentary repeats it. So let's test it. 2,300,000 blocks, 7,300 days. Divide one by the other, you get one block every 4.5 minutes. That's generous because it assumes zero downtime across 2 decades. No floods, no illness, no rest. Now take a single block, quarry it from bedrock, cut it to specification, some from the local Mokattam Formation, some from Tura across the river, the heaviest from Aswan, 900 kilometers to the south. Load it on a barge, ferry it across the Nile, haul it to the plateau on wooden rollers. Drag it up an ever-growing ramp that itself requires millions of cubic meters of fill. Set it. Fit it flush against its neighbor with sub-centimeter tolerance. Each step alone takes hours. Stack them, and the 4.5-minute window explodes. Every 4.5 minutes, day and night, for 7,300 consecutive days. The story falls apart. Not because I say so, because the calculator says so. 20 years without a sick day. Impressive scheduling. You'll say, maybe the block count is wrong. Maybe it's fewer blocks, bigger blocks, a different timeline. Fine. Cut the number in half. Make it 1.15 million. That's one block every 9 minutes for 20 years straight. Still no weekends, still no downtime, still zero margin for the hundreds of things that go wrong on any construction site. And this was the largest construction site in the ancient world. The math doesn't rescue the story. It buries it deeper. All that effort for a schedule that's barely possible even on paper, spectacularly impossible in practice. But the math kills the timeline. Timelines can be patched. What can't be patched is the precision inside the pyramid, because that shouldn't exist at all. The base of the Great Pyramid covers 13 acres. That's roughly 10 football fields. The 4 sides are aligned to true north with an error of 3 arc minutes, 1/20th of a degree. Petrie dragged his theodolite across the Giza plateau in 1882 and measured a deviation of less than 2 centimeters across 230 meters of foundation. He called the precision extraordinary. A century later, satellite-calibrated GPS confirmed the same numbers. In the 21st century, we call that survey-grade precision. In 2560 BC, the accepted toolkit was copper chisels, stone hammers, and a plumb line dangling from a stick. But then I looked at the joints, the casing stones, the polished outer layer, most of which have been stripped over centuries for building material, were fitted with gaps averaging half a millimeter. You cannot slide a human hair between some of them. Soft metal and rope. Half a millimeter. Across hectares. That level of joinery isn't achieved by hand fitting alone. Lehner's own team at the AERA tried replicating a single row and couldn't hold the tolerance past the 5th block. It requires a systematic method of quality control, standardized measurements, repeatable cutting protocols, a tolerance framework. A method no one has described. A method no one has found evidence of. A method the archives, those obsessively thorough archives, never mention. So I went looking for the one thing that should exist, the paper trail. And I found exactly one document, one papyrus. And it's supposed to settle the question forever. In 2013, a team led by Pierre Tellet from the Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale discovered fragments of a logbook at Wadi al-Jarf, an ancient port on the Red Sea coast. The diary of a foreman named Merer, written in hieratic script. After examining the fragments, researchers confirmed it describes the transport of limestone casing blocks from the Tura quarries across the Nile to the Giza plateau. The dates align with the final years of Khufu's reign. This is real. This is documented. And when it was published, every headline declared the mystery solved. But here's what nobody mentions in those headlines. Merer's diary describes the delivery of finishing stones, the polished outer casing. It documents boat trips across the Nile, loading, unloading, travel times. It says nothing about quarrying the 2.3 million core blocks. Nothing about cutting granite. Nothing about internal chambers. Nothing about engineering method. Nothing about ramps, levers, rollers, or sledge logistics. Nothing about workforce coordination on a scale that would rival a modern megaproject. Tellet himself acknowledged in the publication that the logbook covers only the final transport phase. A shipping receipt for the gift wrap presented as proof of the entire construction. That's like finding a delivery note for roof tiles and claiming you've explained how the skyscraper was built. Mystery solved. Pack it up. And here's the thing that makes the Merer Papyrus even more damning for the accepted version, not less. If the Egyptian bureaucracy was thorough enough to document a foreman's boat trips hauling finishing stones in the final phase of construction, then the absence of any equivalent document for the core project, the quarrying, the engineering, the workforce logistics, isn't a gap, it's a void. A deliberate, systematic, screaming void. Either every single operational document about the greatest construction project in history was destroyed, selectively, while grain receipts survived 4,500 years, or those documents never existed, because the people who recorded the grain had nothing to do with the people who built the pyramid. So the timeline doesn't work. The paper trail is a dead end. At this point, I figured maybe the answer is inside the pyramid itself. Maybe the stone tells the story the papyrus couldn't. And that's where things went from bad to impossible. Because why wouldn't it? The king's chamber sits deep inside the structure, 50 meters up, sealed behind corridors so tight your shoulders scrape the walls. Inside, stale air, absolute silence, the cold of stone that hasn't seen sunlight in 4,500 years. Every surface, walls, floor, 9 ceiling slabs, each weighing 45 tons, all Aswan granite, hauled 900 kilometers from the south. Hardness 7 on the Mohs scale. Copper maxes out at 3. You cannot cut granite with copper. You cannot drill granite with copper. You cannot polish granite to a mirror finish with copper. That's not opinion. That's materials science. And yet someone did. Dunn found the first clue in the drill marks. Circular grooves spiraling into the granite, consistent, even, mechanical. He took measurements back to his precision machining facility in Danville, Illinois, and ran the feed rate against modern diamond-tipped drills. The ancient cuts were faster. Dunn isn't an Egyptologist. He spent 40 years in aerospace manufacturing, turbine blades, jet engine components, tolerances measured in microns. He looked at the pyramid not as a monument, but as a precision-engineered structure. And then he looked closer at the cores. The groove depth per revolution implies a downward force and rotational speed that no known ancient technology can produce. The comfortable explanation prefers to look away from this. The data doesn't care. Copper chisels, sure. But Dunn's analysis assumed one thing, that whoever cut this granite could see what they were cutting. I pulled on that thread, and it opened a problem no one has solved. The corridors of the Great Pyramid, the descending passage, the ascending passage, the grand gallery are clean. No soot, no carbon deposits on the ceilings, no blackening. The air inside is stale and motionless, the corridors tight and claustrophobic, and there is no natural light source past the first 40 meters. If thousands of workers spent years carving, polishing, and assembling these tunnels by torchlight, burning oil lamps for thousands of hours in enclosed spaces with minimal ventilation, the ceilings should be coated black. They're not. They're clean stone. Stack up those 3 facts: pristine ceilings, precision machining beyond copper capability, drill rates that surpass modern tools. That's not a gap in the record. That's the wrong story entirely. Whatever lit these corridors didn't use fire, and the go-to rescue, polished copper mirrors bouncing sunlight from the entrance, has been tested. Egyptologist Mark Lehner tried it on camera. It fails after the second turn. The light dissipates. The corridor goes dark. Physics is against it. So they couldn't cut it, they couldn't light it, and they couldn't schedule it. But I kept going, because if the pyramid isn't a construction project that makes sense, maybe it's at least the tomb it's supposed to be. It's not. The king's chamber contains a single granite box, rough cut on the outside, polished to a mirror finish on the inside, lidless and too large to have been brought through the passages after construction. It was placed during building. The official story calls it a sarcophagus, the final resting place of Khufu. But no mummy was ever found inside the Great Pyramid, no canopic jars, no funerary texts on the walls. Every pharaoh before him had all of this. Khufu, nothing. No frescoes, no gold, no ritual objects, no inscriptions. One exception, a crude cartouche bearing the name Khufu, found by Colonel Howard Weiss in 1837. Weiss was under intense financial and political pressure to produce results, and his expedition diary reveals he found the marks after weeks of unproductive blasting with gunpowder in chambers no one else had access to. Samuel Birch at the British Museum ran pigment analysis. The red ochre is inconsistent with confirmed Old Kingdom sites. Convenient timing. Nothing to see here. Now compare that with every other 4th Dynasty burial, covered floor to ceiling with texts, paintings, offerings, and inscriptions proclaiming the pharaoh's name, titles, and journey to the afterlife. Sneferu's bent pyramid, inscriptions everywhere. Menkare's pyramid, a decorated sarcophagus. Khufu's pyramid, nothing. Every other pharaoh's burial screams identity. This one whispers nothing. So, what is it? Every other royal tomb in Egypt is a billboard: name, titles, genealogy, prayers, maps to the afterlife, lists of offerings. The Great Pyramid is a blank. And blanks, in a civilization that recorded everything, are not accidents. They're admissions. Not suspicious at all. But if this isn't a tomb, then what does the way it was sealed tell us? Because that is where the neat, tidy package doesn't just crack, it shatters. 3 granite plugs block the base of the ascending passage. Each one weighs roughly 15 tons. Each one is wider than the passage below it, meaning they couldn't have been pushed up from outside. They were slid down from above, after the passage was built. From the inside. Just your standard tomb design. Wrap your head around that. If the pyramid was built as a tomb, and the granite plugs sealed the burial passage after the pharaoh was interred, then someone had to be inside the structure to release them. And then that someone had no way out. The accepted answer? The workers escaped through a narrow, rough-hewn shaft, the so-called well shaft, discovered centuries later. But that shaft is unfinished, barely wide enough for a single body to crawl through, and it exits into a lower passage that was already packed with limestone debris. It's not an escape route. It's an afterthought at best, a later intrusion at worst. Health and safety was clearly a priority. Petrie looked at the geometry, and Borchardt mapped the passage dimensions. Both reached the same conclusion decades apart. The granite plugs function like a valve, not a lock, designed to close once, permanently, one direction, no reset. This isn't a tomb. This is a machine that was shut down. And if it's a machine, what was it running on? I followed the shafts. In the Queen's Chamber, the one that's supposedly unfinished, supposedly abandoned mid-construction, salt deposits have been found. Specifically, sodium chloride and calcium sulfate. Chemical traces consistent with a reaction between dilute hydrochloric acid and zinc chloride. Dunn flagged this. Then I checked the shafts leading from the Queen's Chamber. 2 of them don't reach the exterior of the pyramid. They stop inside the masonry, sealed with stone blocks. Sealed from construction, not collapse. In a structure supposedly designed for ventilation or symbolic passage of the pharaoh's soul, why build channels that go nowhere? Why seal them? Great ventilation plan. And why leave chemical residue that belongs in a laboratory, not a burial chamber? A chemical reaction needs energy, and the Grand Gallery, 47 meters directly above, was built to deliver it. The Grand Gallery, 47 meters long, nearly 9 meters high, its corbelled walls narrowing in 7 precise steps to a channel at the top. In 1997, acoustics researcher John Stuart Reid placed instruments inside and measured something that shouldn't matter in a burial site. The gallery resonates at specific frequencies. It amplifies sound in a measurable, repeatable way. Separately, A team from the University of Ghent confirmed the same readings a decade later. That's two independent groups, 2 different decades, same result. Now add one more piece. The quartz content in Aswan granite generates a piezoelectric charge under mechanical stress. Pressure on quartz produces voltage. The pyramid is a granite and limestone structure sitting under 6 million tons of compressive load. The measurements don't lie. Is there a mechanism? We don't know yet. Is the hypothesis proven? Not yet. But here's what is documented. Sealed shafts that go nowhere, deliberately, from construction. Chemical traces that belong in a lab, confirmed. Acoustic resonance that's measurable, repeatable, peer-reviewed. And granite under permanent compressive stress, generating a measurable electrical field. Each fact, taken alone, is strange. Taken together, they form a system. Not a burial, not a monument. A system with inputs, channels, and a chamber that was sealed with chemicals that have no business being inside a pharaoh's tomb. These are readings from instruments. And then I hit a wall. Not a factual wall, a literal one. Because the thing that should scare you most isn't what we've found. It's what we've been stopped from finding. In 1993, German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small tracked robot, U-Boot 2, up one of the sealed shafts in the Queen's chamber. After crawling 65 meters through a passage barely 20 centimeters wide, the robot's camera hit a small limestone door with 2 corroded copper fittings, handles or pins, never conclusively identified. The discovery made international headlines. In 2002, a National Geographic-sponsored team drilled a small hole through that door, and the camera revealed a second door behind it, smoother, cleaner, deeper inside the structure. In 2011, the Jedi Project, a joint Egyptian-British collaboration, inserted a micro-snake camera through a drilled hole in the second door and captured images of red ochre markings on the floor of a small sealed chamber beyond. Lines, symbols, something deliberate. And then, complete, deafening silence. No further exploration was authorized. No full publication of the Jedi Project's findings has appeared. No access has been granted to any independent team. Gantenbrink himself was banned from the site after his discovery, not for misconduct, not for damage, but for publicizing the footage before the Egyptian authorities had decided what to say about it. The shafts remain sealed. The chamber behind the second door remains unseen by human eyes. 15 years of silence. 3 robotic expeditions, 2 doors, 1 sealed chamber with deliberate markings, and a complete shutdown of investigation at the exact moment the evidence got interesting. Then, in 2017, the Scan Pyramids collaboration, led by Mehdi Tayoubi and Kunihiro Morishima, fired muon detectors through 6 million tons of stone. Muon tomography tracks cosmic ray particles to map density differences inside massive structures. What they found? A massive void above the Grand Gallery, at least 30 meters long, possibly longer. The data is unambiguous. It's there. It's real. It's enormous. And as of today, not a single person has been inside. 2 sealed doors, red markings behind them, a void the size of a cathedral directly above the most acoustically precise corridor in the ancient world, and research that simply stopped. We've spent centuries believing we understood this structure, a tomb for a pharaoh, copper chisels and determination, 20 years and a shipping receipt for the decorative layer. The numbers say otherwise. The silence of the archives says otherwise. The precision says otherwise. The chemistry says otherwise. The acoustics say otherwise. And behind two sealed doors and a void no one is allowed to enter, something sits that no camera has fully recorded and no researcher has been permitted to reach. They recorded every sack of barley, every priest's complaint, every linen delivery to every temple along the Nile. But about the greatest engineering project in the history of this planet, not a single line. That is not forgetfulness. That is the impossibility of recording something you never witnessed. Next time, we go inside. Every chamber, every shaft, every anomaly the Great Pyramid is still hiding. And the answer, the accepted version, is afraid to give.